Continuing with the stats, I'm going to start with the stat, Alli, that you pulled and you were like, oh my gosh, you have to read this. At Harvard, 60% of grades are A's. What does that really say about learning, motivation, and readiness for work?
One option was a degree from Harvard, and the other option was an internship from Google. And remarkably, a majority of parents picked the internship at Google over the Harvard degree as the best path.
We're doing it wrong by we have the data, we have the tools to do these types of things. It should be out there more.
Everybody's got A's. What students need more than good grades and test scores right now are internships or some sort of work integrated learning.
You're listening to the Disrupt Education podcast, powered by Science. Here are your hosts, Peter Hostrawser and Alli Dahl.
Welcome to this episode of the Disrupt Education podcast. Got Alli Dahl here. Got a great guest. But Alli, before we jump in, what's happening? What's happening with you? It's dark out at my place in the afternoons. So
silly darkness. I would say, I like to say at this time of year, because, we're in the darkest 12 weeks of the year when we're recording this and when this episode will come out. But by the time this episode comes out, you'll almost be through it. And so, or maybe it will be like right around the end of it, and just, embrace the dark times. Like, it's a good time for reflection, and it's a really good time to kind of like do other work. Now that you just like said this, I'm thinking like Robert Peppo. This is a little bit of a throwback. He always talks about like your on and off season, and like he's in food business, so the food industry is really big in the summer. Yep. But like in the winter time is when he's doing all of his planning to go gangbusters the next summer. So it's like, if this is your dark season, like use that time while you can, because it's not going to be like that forever.
Cycles. I like it. We've been caught in a cycle a little bit in education. I think this is a great guest. We actually just figured out in our previous conversation pre-recording, he's part of the reason Disrupt Education started. So I'm pretty excited to talk to Brandon Busteed. Brandon, how are you, man?
Doing great, Peter. Yeah, and I'm glad we discovered the connection here. The education and the workforce development space is a pretty small world after all. And as we just figured out, we connected in 2015. So it's hard to believe that's a decade that just roars by. But really good to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, it was a great kind of gap. It really kind of opened my eyes into some of the stats you were given about, the way that colleges and the professional world were like looking at each other, but they really were not on the same page. And it was pretty eye-opening. And I was like, yes, yes. And I remember it was a lunch, like it was like a kind of a working lunch thing in Switzerland. And it was amazing. Continuing with the stats, I'm going to start with the stat, Alli, that you pulled and you were like, oh my gosh, you have to read this. At Harvard, 60% of grades are A's. What does that really say about learning, motivation, and readiness for work?
Everybody loves to talk about Harvard, and in some cases it's fair, in other cases maybe not. But this was, I think, a real eye opener. There was a major report that came out in January that the Harvard faculty were engaged in. That talked about, basically that the high level is their disappointment in student engagement in class, right? Not showing up, not attending class, all this type of stuff. And then, subsequently, just a week or so ago, there was another report on grade inflation at Harvard. And the stat is what you just said, Peter. As of today, 60% of all the grades at Harvard are an A. What's astounding, though, is that in just 20 years, so rewind the clock 20 years ago, it was 25% of all grades at Harvard were an A. So we've gone in 2 decades at one of America's, most prestigious, elite, selective colleges and universities. We've jumped from 25% of all grades as an A to 60% of all grades as an A. And it kind of led me to make the quip that, everybody's got A's. What students need more than good grades and test scores right now are internships or some sort of work integrated learning. So anyway, there's a lot to say about the grade inflation. I think there's also a lot to say about, where our priorities are or should be. But that's a pretty tough one, I think, for Harvard to figure out. And I'll tell you, full disclosure, I don't have any real strong connection with Harvard, but I serve on the Harvard Extension School Dean's Advisory Board. So this is an informal advisory board for the Dean of Harvard Extension School. And what's interesting, though, is that when they talk about the students at Harvard Extension School, which is different than Harvard College, they're talking about incredibly engaged students, many of whom are working adults, right? Always showing up at class, always engaged, whether it's online, in person, right? All of the above. And there is not grade inflation at Harvard Extension School. So it's this tale of two very, very different Harvards.
Is this misaligned ROI?
I mean, look, there's a lot to unpack. You guys tell me what you think is going on there. I mean, I think on the student side of things and their parents, right? Well-intentioned, maybe, but I think there's been a strong consumerist, type drive where, you expect good grades, you demand good grades. That's part of the compact. That said, Harvard has gotten considerably more selective over the years. So you could also just say, well, you know what? They've become so much more selective. The students who are coming there are all rock stars. And so why wouldn't you expect grade inflation? But I think that's probably a red herring relative to some of the other expectations, because what came out in the report and the qualitative comments in the report were teaching assistants, graduate students mainly who are doing teaching, and faculty saying, they were really concerned about giving out bad grades because they then got bad course ratings or teacher ratings or TA ratings. And so it's this vicious cycle of, I don't want to give out a bad grade because that might, affect how I'm rated or the performance of my, department, because we're measuring it based on enrollment in classes. Like it's so I can understand a little bit about what's going on, but when everybody's getting an A, what's the value of an A anymore?
That's what I'm wondering. Like, and that's what caught my eye with the report and you commenting on it, was just like, so what does a grade mean? Why are we grading? Like that's really what it came down for me. And I've never, and I was even in education, like my GPA, that was never what I was asked. Like when I was like being hired in education, right? The only field that I know of that gives grades. Yeah. And they weren't even like me coming back and being hired in that career field. Well, it wasn't like, oh, well, you got this GPA, so, you're a top candidate or you're not a candidate or anything in between. I mean, maybe it's a screener, but like, there's got to be better ways to screen in 2025, 2026 than a grade. So I'm curious, like, Brandon, like, what do you think in like your work, right? Love to hear about your work, and like, why are we grading, and like, or what is a better way?
Yeah, look, it's a fair question, because it was a few years ago now that Google came out and announced, after massive analysis on their people analytics, that they were no longer going to ask about the GPAs of candidates who apply for jobs at Google, because they found no relationship between GPAs and performance on the job, right? So like there's another cannon shot from one of the world's, most recognized employers that obviously has highly sophisticated data on employees and performance. And so, look, I don't want to quite go as far as saying grades don't matter at all, but I will say they matter a lot less than students believe they do, than parents believe they do. And to your point, Alli, right, most of us have never been asked our GPA ever for anything after school, maybe in your very first job, right, where they were like, what else do you have? You didn't have a work experience, you never, so well, what was your GPA? And it's just one of a handful of various criteria they might look at. So I think it's a real challenge, because grades are, of course, how higher ed has measured itself and its performance. And you say, okay, well, how else might we do a better job on this? Well, one of the things that employers would love to measure students on is their work readiness. And there's a lot of ways, by the way, to measure this. Some are just simple, quantification of experiences. Have you had a job or an internship before? If so, was it one where you were able to apply what you were learning in the more academic sense, and where you can kind of bring that to life for me in our discussion, or in terms of how you might apply some of that. And then we can also measure some of the things they did in the form of projects that they worked on, long-term projects. And so that now challenges us to come up with a different way to rate performance, right? You can create a rubric to evaluate a project. It might not necessarily be the same grading scheme as some of the other ways we do this. And I've been, inspired by examples I've seen out there. New tech high schools, which are around the country in various locations, they have project-based learning as kind of their core component. And one of the core ways that they measure it is they have students deliver presentations on their projects that they did for the community. And so it's literally like people from the community come in, and I'm, one of the students, and I deliver, the outcome of the project I worked on or whatever. And you're getting a grade essentially from, the wisdom of the crowds in the community there. So there's a lot of other ways that we can look towards what does success mean. And with grade inflation, grades were probably never the perfect measure to begin with, but with rampant grade inflation, we are making them less relevant by the day.
I know students who've gotten A's in coursework, including myself, that didn't learn anything. I say it all the time. It's funny because, I'm a business educator at the secondary level, and that's kind of where I came into the world. And now I'm lucky enough to be an internship coordinator, which is something a little bit unique to many high schools. I think it's evolving. But I always would ask, some of the accounting teachers first, say, like, would you let this kid do your taxes? You gave him an A. And you get some raised eyebrows there. It's very interesting. But I think one of the things that happens there is kind of the trickle down effect, especially when you have a lot of parents who are looking for, look, post-secondary education is not cheap these days, right? And you have a lot of parents and families looking for, hey, this is a way that we can lower maybe some costs. We can get some scholarships. We can get, some grants and different things like that. And so that pressure is pushed all the way down. It's very interesting. In our previous conversation before we started recording, I did say today, I literally told students, your grades don't matter. And then you always get that one kid in the back who's like, yeah, I told you. And I'm like, no. Like, they do matter, but it's just the way that you frame them and how you can talk about these skills and different things. And that's why I heard a lot of these kind of stories and places where we can start this integration of experiential learning. Wanted to kind of, pick your brain a little bit on that, because when students' grades are just it, like, okay, I got an A. I can see it in my formative and summatives and all the academic talk where, you give a grade and the kids are like, yeah, I got an A, so I'm just going to sit back. I'm not going to show up. The motivation drops. You had a quote there, and we're going to use the word internship, but I'm going to guess we're going to go beyond it. But it was students need a good internship more than they need a good grade.
Yep.
Explain.
Yeah. So look, it in part is what we've already touched on, right? Grades were never the perfect measure of performance to begin with. But now that we have rampant grade inflation, you ask the question, what's the value of a grade? And I think it's a fair question today. So, this point about they need an internship a lot more than they need a good grade. If you look at today's 18 to 24-year-olds, they're the least working generation in U.S. history for at least as long as we've had good measurement of, how much have you worked in a paid job, et cetera. And so, one, they've just had less work experience than any generation that's come before them. Now, on top of that, you look at the percentage of, for example, college graduates who had an internship during college where they were able to apply what they were learning in the classroom. It turns out, this is from the largest representative study of college graduates in US history that I worked on when I was at Gallup, it's less than a third of college graduates hit the mark on that. So it's not that it's not happening, it's only happening for a third, right? So 2/3 are missing out on it. And the reason why that matters so much is because of this. A college student who has an internship during college doubles their odds of having a good job waiting for them upon graduation. And it doubles the odds that they end up engaged in their work, whatever that work is, over a lifetime. So to say it's a game changer is not an overstatement, right? And I think from that perspective, you say, okay, why wouldn't we work to ensure that every student has an internship, or as close as we can, internship-like experience, knowing how important it is? So not many are getting it. The ones who do, it's a game changer in their career trajectory from the beginning all the way through to the end. And so you sit back and you have to ask the question, why shouldn't something like an internship or work integrated learning, if we want to be broader in our terminology, be foundational, be core to the educational experience? Right now, we've made it optional, tangential. It might be in certain programs. You mentioned you're, focus on business education. Sure. In some classes, it's more linked to a work integrated learning opportunity. But for the most part, we have a massive supply and demand gap here. So this is another data point that I cite all the time. There were 8.2 million college students who wanted an internship last year. Only 3.6 million got one. So here we are with this massive gap between supply and demand for internships. And so a couple obvious things. So far, we have no evidence that internships scale. All right. I'd like to figure out how we create more and work with employers to create more internship opportunities. But short of that, how do we come up with other ways that we create work integrated learning opportunities? And I think this gets into a number of opportunities. Industry immersive learning in the way that we do in my organization at Edconic. It is taking students who have existing paid jobs and helping them connect the dots between those paid jobs and what they're learning, right? A curating of the naturally occurring work that they're already doing. But it also can just get down to simple things: a micro internship, a job shadow, even encouraging a student to interview 6 people in different jobs about what they do in their job, right? I mean, even that would be a powerful starting place for most students.
You're in the higher ed space, right? And, Peter and I have a lot of these conversations, in the high school arena. And then a lot of people are questioning the higher ed route, right? Like right now. And so it's like, when you're talking about these, internships are the way, what can higher ed do besides oh, well, we're going to add an internship guaranteed in our program, but you are now going to go to school for 5 years or longer, or an extra semester, or you have to do the summer or something like my question is around, how do we start this sooner or create an option that doesn't involve maybe 4 years of higher ed, right? I don't know if your works in the high school level or in between, but do kids need that higher ed that seemingly is inflated and maybe isn't giving kids what they need for a future? What are some alternative pathways that might be good and that you've seen in the work that you've done in education for your career?
Yeah, look, the good news is I think there's a growing number of pathways, viable pathways, right, that are alternative to what you think of as traditional college, and that, there's more visibility around those pathways. So I'll just cite a few, right? We've become aware of the fact that a lot of large employers are now heavily investing in what they call education benefits programs, right? So this runs the gamut from Amazon and Disney, to Starbucks and Chipotle. There's a whole host of companies that are now offering not just to pay for employees to get a college degree, but any number of ongoing training opportunities, right? So when I was at Kaplan, I had a chance to work with Amazon and their career choice program. At the time, all 750,000 frontline Amazon employees were eligible for it. And they could get everything from a community college degree to an online 4-year bachelor's degree to a truck driving license paid for by Amazon. And so, you say, well, okay, why would Amazon do that? Or why would any of these employers do it? Well, it's really smart. For Amazon, they're doing so much hiring into jobs that they know are essentially dead end jobs, right? Like they're aware of it. A picker and packer in a warehouse, it's not a job that many people graduate through to management in Amazon, right? And in reality, it's a job that at some point in time, it may go away. It'll be a robot doing it, right? But anyway, here's the point. They still need so many people in these kinds of roles that they're using this as a recruitment strategy. They're saying, okay, hey, Alli, we know you're not going to come into this job forever, but come here for a couple of years. We'll pay you well, and we'll pay for your college degree while you're doing it. Now, if I'm an enterprising young person who doesn't want any college debt, maybe still wants to live at home, either because they're caretakers, they prefer it, or they want to save money, right? You can go work right out of high school for a company like Amazon or Chipotle or Starbucks, you name it, and get your college degree paid for. It's a debt-free college model, right? So that's not the residential experience and the way, but a traditional 18-year-old age-wise could go into a program like that, still get a college degree, and do it debt-free, right? It's not a bad alternative. And in fact, if you look at the fastest growing demographics age-wise in some of the large adult online universities, right? Southern New Hampshire University, Western Governors University, ASU. It is traditional age college students, 18 to 22-year-olds, who are choosing to do their degree online because many of them are doing it through their employer who's paying for it, or they're choosing to stay at home and accelerate faster through their degree because they can do it faster through an online degree and through competency-based education and prior learning credit for work, right? And so I'll finish on that point. Those big universities that I just mentioned have done a marvelous job of recognizing academic credit from prior work that people have done. So you come out of the military, you can articulate the training you had in the military towards college credits. If I were to evaluate the large training programs of employers, I can articulate academic credit. And so it's an accelerator, right? It says, hey, what you've done matters and was valuable, and we are going to recognize it here. You're already 10 credits on your way to a degree or 20 credits on your way to a degree. The average college and university in the US does not embrace prior learning credits for work, and they really should. It's an incredibly powerful strategy.
Do we need academic credits, or should there be just business credits at this point?
So look, this goes back to an article I wrote, I think in 2020, based on some survey research that I was involved with. And basically what it said, Peter, it asked parents of 5th through 12th graders what they thought was the best path to a good job for their child, right? So, put yourself in the parental role. What do you think is the best path to a good job for your child? And it was kind of a fun choice where one option was a degree from Harvard and the other option was an internship from Google. And remarkably, a majority of parents picked the internship at Google over the Harvard degree as the best path. Now, both of those are really powerful brand names, okay? But we're talking about they're choosing an internship over a degree as the best path, because you step back and you go, okay, why do we care about getting into a good college? Well, we go to college because we want to get a good job. I mean, that's the number one reason why Americans value higher education, is to get a good or better job. We can't ignore that. And you say, okay, well, you want to get into a top college because that's what leads to a good job. But wait a minute, if you can get an internship at Google, why not just go for it? And so I think it's a profound example. Like, if there really were more opportunities for students to go into apprenticeship programs, to go into more robust internship programs, you're starting to see little examples of this. but it's just not at scale right now. But clearly the appetite among parents who see, that connection. It's like, hey, I'm after a great career and a good job for my kid is the ultimate goal. If they could, leapfrog this college thing and find another route, yeah, I'm open to that.
Right. It sounds like, if I was a student, I would be like, yeah, I'm going to go work at Amazon. I'm going to get if I needed a college degree for something, I would go get a college degree, and then I'm bouncing, man. I'm like, I'm somewhere else. So that's why I'm just wondering, like, number one, I mean, we know like students coming out of college with hardly any experience is they're going to ask for more up front, right? They're going to be like, I need a $300,000, signing bonus because I got to pay for my college. I'm exaggerating, but you're also looking at like the cost to a company.
Yeah.
That's why I asked that question. Yeah, of course, being a little facetious, but I think kind of going all the way back to the internship, you're scaling the success rates once you have an internship at the college level. I don't even know if this is out there, but I'm super excited because we do it at the high school level. Now they're micro, they're 60 hours and different things like that. And we dive into, I can't say soft skills anymore because of Jason Van Nuss, but I have to say like durable skills or cross-sector competencies or whatever, those skills. And I would love to know. I mean, it's evolving. So I'm wondering, would that 4 or 5 times that? I don't know. So that's very interesting to me. I don't know.
Yeah, look, and I think, we need more enlightened leaders at the helm, whether it's CEOs or, chief human resource officers, right, at the helm of employers, because the earlier you can identify the talent, the better it is, right? So take, the difference between a high school intern and a college intern, obviously a few years older, a little bit more mature, et cetera, so on and so forth. But the reality is that if we think about how we do talent spotting and talent development in this country for almost everything else, take sports, right? I mean, gosh, we see, a kid throw a football in 7th grade. And if you're a coach that knows what they're looking for, or a talent scout, you might not be able to predict what happens in that person's life, but you're like, that kid can throw a football, right? I mean, we are so good at identifying talent like that, and you can identify it pretty young, and you can develop it pretty young, right? So why shouldn't we be thinking about identifying entrepreneurial talent at that age, right? Some of the superstars just pop out and start doing it right at that age. I mean, they're starting companies in high school and going on to have incredibly successful careers. So I do think we have sort of infantilized students, I'll use that word, in terms of how we look at their capabilities. You got high school students, you've got a really talented, hardworking high school student. They are absolutely capable of going into any number of top jobs, short of places where you need credentialing, or you're going into medical school, because to be a doctor, you've got to pass certain exams and standards, et cetera. But short of some of those things, right, you could take most super talented students directly out of high school into development programs where they're working right away. They're gaining valuable job experience. And, if all of us think about some of the most memorable experiences we've had in terms of the things where we learned the most, they were things that were hands-on or on the job, right? I did something real. It wasn't theoretical, right? I got feedback on it. I had to go back to the drawing board. I had to work on it, multiple times. That iterative feedback is a really critical piece of it. But the long story short is, yes, we can develop talent at younger ages. We choose not to for any various reasons that we get hung up on. And I think it's a huge missed opportunity.
We actually ended 2025 with a series with U Science that helps people uncover their aptitudes.
Yeah.
And they're really targeting like middle school, high school kids so that they know what they're apt at. They know what they can do. And it's like you said, identifying, like, if in 7th grade, this kid can throw a football, they're only going to get better at it if they are then put in situations where they can develop that aptitude. And we're doing it wrong by not, we have the data, we have the tools to do these types of things. It should be out there more, because I think that's part of what you're talking about with internships and getting them at scale. If I was an employer and you're trying to send me high school or college kids that are quote unquote untested, but you have data backing like what they're good at, and they don't have work experience because they're young people, they don't have a lot of it. I think employers would be, and this is the opportunity, right? Like to really, if these kids are trainable, learnable, they're apt at what you can do, I think there would be a lot more people at the helm trying to do internship or work integrated learning earlier. So it's like the opportunity is there, and it's like you're sprinkling, like there are companies doing it in different ways, there are more pathways, but it's like there needs to be more. Yes.
Yeah, look, it does. I mean, that's part of our issue, right? My big point about all these things is we just haven't scaled it. It's not that it doesn't exist, that we haven't scaled it. We haven't made it a common experience for students. But the way, the ways we can think about it, one, if employers just looked at the data right now, they would convince themselves today based on existing evidence. So here's a good stat for you. And this is back to college internships because there's just more data about it, right? But I'm sure you'd see similar trends with students who are doing internships in high school. But employers who have interns end up hiring 72% of the interns into a paid job, right? So that makes it arguably the most successful talent acquisition strategy on the planet, because if you look at the average employer's typical applicant to hire ratio, it's 0.5%. The yield on that is 0.5%. So an internship, right, is 144 times more effective than your typical just open up a job applicant, have somebody come in, apply for it, interview them, hire them, right? And so the data today is convincing enough. For whatever reason, people aren't paying close attention to it. I think because they get hung up on a couple really simple things. They're like, oh, well, we got to pay a student, while they're here as an intern. Sure, you do. You should. Don't do unpaid internships. It's a massive issue for students who can't afford to not have an unpaid internship. And so we can just stop there on that point. But the other thing they get hung up on is they're like, oh, it takes a lot of time and energy to manage an internship. Yes, it does. And Peter, I know you've dealt with these things, but a well-organized organization with solid management can come up with any number of meaningful projects for a whole host of interns, including coming up with team-based projects, right? We think about internships as solitary things. I would love to bring on entire cohorts of internships of interns for certain projects, right? So I think with a little bit of creativity, and then putting pressure on other employers around this, like what I wrote about today in Forbes was this idea of a 5% pledge. Why 5%? Is that today the average employer is basically offering about 2% of internships as a ratio of their full-time employees. That's our current national run rate. So for every full-time employee there is in an organization, we've got about the equivalent of 2% of that number worth of internships, right? But if we were to bump that to 5%, so a 5% internship to full-time job rate, we would give an internship to every college student in America who wants one. That's all we have to do. We just get every employer to the 5% threshold. And so here's my point, right? I would love to see a campaign where employers come out and say, we're going to pledge 5% internships, right, as our commitment. And there's many employers who are already there. This is not an undoable number. In my organization, it would be about a dozen internships a year on average, right, for us to hit that 5% pledge. It's totally doable. And I think if you start to put that out there as something that people reach for as a goal, and by the way, you're an employer who isn't at that 5% threshold, it's kind of not cool, right? It's unacceptable. It's like, well, what do you mean, Alli? Your company's not at the 5% threshold? Well, what are you doing? We need to get to that place.
Yeah. I need you talking to our whole communities in the high school area. It is interesting because I think, early on, one of the biggest challenges that we have at the secondary level is really that mindset, right? The mindset of, uh, look, I'll just be frank here. We have students who are high, very high academic performing students who fight tooth and nail when it comes to reflection, connecting, really diving into how did you use this skill? Be very thoughtful, be very unique. It's you. And there's not a right or wrong answer. And that's one of the shifts that we see with that. And that might be, again, the maturity thing that you speak of. Definitely, and I'll throw this over to you, Allie, because the girls in our classes are way farther than the boys. And I'm still immature myself, so I'm good there. One of the things I want to ask you then, Brandon, is okay, so yeah, you're going to have the company. We have companies that get it, right? We have some like tech companies and its pipeline, and these kids are actually interning through college from their high school internships that they know they can pick the young blood right away and say, okay, this person has what it takes.
Yeah.
And we have a few of those, and it's usually smaller businesses and or up and coming businesses. So where the unicorns are starting to eat the dinosaurs here. Um, I've always thought this, and I don't know. I just wanted your kind of opinion on it, or if you've seen it, to get that 2% to the 5%. I mean, is there a way where we throw like some politics at it, right? I mean, we give grants, we give monies, tax
Yeah.
deductions, all these different things. Have you seen that? Is there any talk of that? I mean, just if Allie's curmudgeon and doesn't want to give up that next dozen internships,
Yeah.
maybe a tax break or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
What are
no, I
your
think we
thoughts?
should, we should start to have more productive conversations at the federal and state level around how do we incentivize this. I mean, obviously you can go stick or carrot, maybe a mix of both. Other countries have done this. I mean, I'll use the example of the UK. I'm there frequently because we have operations there, and they passed a levy, a tax on companies, which wasn't popular when it went through, to tax them for funding to support apprenticeship programs, and it has created a robust apprenticeship pipeline in the UK. Employers have essentially funded it through the tax levy, right? So that would be more of a stick-based approach. And I think when we talk about the U.S., let's just go back to this data, right? Because I broke it down in this Forbes article I wrote just this morning. 8.2 million college students wanted an internship. Only 3.6 million got one, right? So to get to that gap, we would have to get to a 5% ratio of internships to jobs. Okay. And you say, okay, well, let's talk about the financial cost or investment required to do that. If every employer hit the 5% threshold and we got to the 8.2 million, that would be, you use this math, an 8-week internship at double the federal minimum wage. That would be $14.50 an hour. Pretty good rate for an internship.
Mhm.
Would equate to all in $38 billion. So to provide a paid internship at almost $15 an hour over 8 weeks for every student who wants one would be 38 billion. Well, we're already covering 44% of that demand with the existing internships, right? And so you say, okay, to get to the 5%, really, it's not that big a number. Let's just say that the federal government matched dollar for dollar every employer who has an internship. Let's just simple policy, dollar for dollar match. Anybody who has an internship will match your dollar against it. That would mean the federal government investing $19 billion to ensure that every college student in America has an internship. That's it, $19 billion. Now, you say, okay, well, how does that compare? That's 0.3% of our federal budget. Okay, 0.3%. Well, that federal budget is 6.7 trillion, so no one can comprehend those numbers. So let's break it down. Right now, this past year, we're going to spend about $34 billion in Pell Grant aid at the federal level. Okay, most people know Pell Grant. We're at about $34 billion a year invested in that. Here's a good one for you. Annually, we have averaged about 17.6 billion in farm subsidies since 1933. Okay, so now both of those are important. I'm a fan of continuing to fund Pell Grants. I'm a fan of continuing to support farm subsidy. But my point is this 19 billion that would be required for the dollar for dollar match for every internship in America, it's on par with what we're doing for farm subsidies. It's far less than what we're spending on Pell Grants. And I can't think of anything, more important for our talent development system. So can we do this? Heck yeah.
That's why we had you on, because we're like, he's got the info. And I think it's so, my mind is still reeling to the fact that you guys met each other like, in Switzerland 10 years ago. And it was like, it was a part of why this podcast started. So
I remember those pie charts, by the way. They're in my head. They're burnt in.
That's good. You got a good memory, Peter.
He does. So how does this, as I don't want to wrap up this conversation, but, as we wrap up this conversation, I'm just curious, it's like, how does all this stuff that you talk about bleed into the work that you're doing at Iconic and just like your career in education and everything? And like, what would you want to say, to our listeners on the Disrupt Education podcast with that?
Yeah. Look, we have a lot of room where we can be creative with some of the things that are just happening in, kind of in their natural capacity. Right. And so I mentioned the fact that a lot of students already are working in a paid job. Of college students, it's 75% of today's college students have a paid job during college. The issue is that less than a third say they have a job or an internship where they're able to apply what they're learning in the classroom. So we're missing the connection. We're missing the opportunity to curate what could be learning from work that maybe students aren't thinking about. I'll use my example. In high school, I was one of the jobs I had was as a cashier at Ponderosa Steakhouse, right?
Nice.
Now,
great
I learned
buffet,
how to,
by the way.
You've been a Pondo guy? Yeah. I learned how to operate the cash register in a few days, right? That wasn't that complicated. But had someone helped me really think about all the other things that I could learn from being in that workplace environment, it would have been a game changer, right? To say, well, tell me about the management's, the style of the manager who, runs that particular Ponderosa. Is it a motivational style? Is it and reflecting on the leadership style of the manager at the branch, right? How did somebody diffuse a really tense situation with a customer? Right. And how was it effective or ineffective? I mean, you could talk about supply chain management and try to, to come up with like, well, how did that steak get to that Ponderosa freezer before it was cooked, before it went out on the buffet? Right. And so there's so much that we can learn from work. Right. So the first point, Alli, is that we need to get to a place culturally that we value the learning that comes from all work, including retail jobs and jobs that we think are dead-end jobs. And there is learning from all work. We need to value the learning from work. That's one big point. And as I think about the work that we do at EdConic, I mean, we're one of many organizations that are trying to create different versions of work integrated learning for students. And I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't believe deeply in what we're doing, that it's unique. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. But we create what I like to describe as industry immersive learning experiences. So we partner with some of the world's most renowned organizations, Vogue, Sotheby's, New York Times, Manchester City, and we're creating immersive experiences for students where they're learning about the industry, right, of journalism or sport or fashion or art. And they're being exposed to all the different jobs that exist in those industries. So an internship, you might do your internship in digital marketing. You learn about marketing. That's great. Did you really learn about all the other roles and functions across the organization? Probably not. And in our case, we're giving students these hands-on experiential opportunities. Everything we do, and this is something that other organizations and schools can do. We do it with world-renowned brands, so it's got its unique essence. But here's the simple point. Every one of our programs is co-designed and co-taught between an industry expert and an educator. And I know that sounds so simple, but that's where so much of the magic comes to life. Co-designed
Yep.
and co-taught between an industry expert and an educator. And for our industry experts, we're doing it with people who are the literal Michael Jordans in their roles, right? You know, you think about the global creative director at Vogue. You don't get to that job unless you're one of the best creative directors in the world, right? And so we've got that special essence. But my point here is that it's a gift that everybody could receive. The idea that a school could work on creating, or educational and experiential learning experiences that are co-designed and co-taught between industry experts at the local level and educators or teachers there at the school. I think that's something that all of us can unlock, and where we see it directly in the work that we're doing at EdConic. But it's an example, I think, that anybody can apply.
I absolutely love that model because the way that I'm learning so much. By the way, I got like 20 pages of notes down here, but just like I did in Switzerland. But when we work with our partners, our organizations, we're not quite at Vogue, I'll tell you that. But like we're working with them and we're working together. We're like, well, what if we can give you somebody who's thirsty for a lot of information, understanding your whole business? Yes, you can. We help them build a project, or they have outcomes, or they have deadlines and those types of things. And then they get the intern, or we call them interns, but they get a job coach with them. They get somebody to help. So if there's a challenge, you don't have to, mess with it as an organization. You're like, hey, Peter, our intern here is kind of struggling over here. You want to maybe, and it's built into our curriculum.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. I love that. I love
great
that
examples. Great examples, Peter. I mean, the more, if the internship that the student is taking isn't supported by a manager that's able to provide the student with regular feedback or whatever, right? To think about where we can have scaffolding that supports that, right? A career coach, somebody helps you reflect on it, even if it's just a teacher who asks their students in their classroom who has a job and what is their job, and then draws on that from time to time. Be like, hey, Brandon, tell me what you've learned at the Ponderosa lately about, customer, patterns around, what they're selecting. Like, did they all upgrade to the buffet? Did they just get the, I mean, like, there could be so many examples that are drawn out of students for the benefit of the rest of the class, for the benefit of the teacher, actually, right? So, so I think there's so many examples of this scaffolding that we can create, and your example of thinking about coaches that support students in the process, or even support for employers that make it easier for them to run internship programs. These are all things that go a long way.
So one of the things that I see at the high school level, and I just kind of wanted to say this, you have that data of, the younger generation, or they're not employed. I think that goes right back into that we need to change the culture and the value of work, because it's now everybody's in, it's not a bad thing, but everybody's in AP. They're AP to death. They're in all kinds of sports, or they go way deep into a sport where, they're full season. Their entire day is planned. There is no room for work, and work is looked down upon. So I see that, and I just wanted to like throw that out because that's what we see at the secondary level, and that's something. I don't know, Allie, did you see that in your schools?
Definitely. The last school that I worked at was very like upper middle class, socioeconomically, like the parents were very involved, and the kids had very busy schedules, from dusk till dawn to dusk, like
And dusk till
they were
dawn.
busy. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I don't know when these kids slept, because I mean, they were taking all those types of classes, and like I was also one of those kids. I was very busy, but I did work. did work. And, I know we'll talk about this on the next episode as we kind of reflect on what you're saying, but the work experience was invaluable. And I knew at the time how it was helping me in other areas. But not everyone had that experience and aren't necessarily as like mercenary as maybe I was. I liked making money. I liked being able to buy stuff with my own money. And there's giving kids that opportunity and then also teaching them how it's valuable. I mean, I love what you said there. We need to value the learning from all work. I could not have said that better, because that is a really cool, and I know we didn't fully, but you talk about how you have done your whole career at the intersection of learning and places of work. And I think that really encapsulates a lot of what you do, Brandon, because of that quote there.
Yeah.
Great.
Love that. Love that. How, as we wrap up here, how can people connect with you, with EdConic, and just learn more, man? Because, 10 years, man, went by.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, we got to get to Switzerland again. And
it flies.
But,
yeah. Well, look, really the only platform I invest any time is LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn, Brandon Busteed. I'm the only one there, the one and only. So that makes it easy. But EdConic is just like it sounds, iconic, except education, edconic.com. You can see the programs and the partners we work with. We have pre-college programs for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. We have undergraduate summer programs for college students, and we also run some master's programs with Vogue and with Sotheby's Institute of Art. So it's a really cool portfolio. We're working with world-renowned organizations and creating transformative experiences for the students that are part of it. So great chat today. It's great to Peter reconnect, and Alli, thanks for reaching out and finding me on LinkedIn, which is the always on great place to convene. So
yes.
Love that. This actually really is, we just want to tell our listeners and everybody, if you're still leaning on grades, still grading on effort instead of real learning, maybe this is your wake up call. So, love to wrap this one up. Again, check Brandon out on LinkedIn. Trust me, you do have some great posts. There's lively conversations in the comments. We love those too. Yeah. And you can kind of get even your own masterclass there. Check out edconic.com. For Alli Dahl, I'm Peter Hostrawser. Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next time on the Disrupt Education Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Disrupt Education Podcast. If this episode sparked an idea, challenged your thinking, or helped you see education differently, well, that's exactly why we're here. We're highlighting real stories and bold ideas shaping the future of learning. A quick thank you to our sponsor, UScience BrightPath, the next generation platform helping students make personalized decisions as they move from education to career. If you're serious about connecting students to real opportunity, head to uScience.com/Disrupt Education-podcast. Request a demo and let them know you heard about UScience right here on the Disrupt Education Podcast. For more episodes and clips and ways to connect, you can always visit DisruptEducationPodcast.com. I'm Peter Hostrawser. Keep disrupting. We'll see you next time on the podcast.